Rosalia Bolin is the spokesperson for UNICEF and she joins us live now from Gaza. Rosalia, I'm so glad to have you on the programme with us. First of all, your sort of instant reaction. I mean, I'm sure it's a real mixture and deep emotions that are coming through now that this ceasefire has begun.
Yes, absolutely. Today has been somewhat of an odd day because as we woke up early this morning, we woke up to the sound of drones flying over and explosions. Then 8:30 a.m. came. There was lots of families out in the street, lots of children who were waving at me and celebrating, but we could hear the explosions continue and we heard shooting from heavy weapons. So it was obvious that the ceasefire hadn't started yet. And then at 11:50 when it was finally confirmed, and we went out again, there was lots of children running at me and asking me in confusion, so is the war over now? Is it over for good? Because I really want to go back to my home. Children have been talking about the past couple of days about their dreams to finally sleep in their own bed again, to find the toys that they've had to leave behind as they fled for some over a year ago. So it's important that this ceasefire lasts. These children are filled with enormous hope and enormous expectations. And at the same time, they are in need of literally everything. They've experienced deep, deep suffering and utter deprivation over the past 15 plus months. And that's not just related to the bombs and the bullets. It's the living conditions too that has put the lives of children here in Gaza at risk. They are in makeshift tents that don't protect them from the cold, from the rain. They're still wearing summer clothes, although it's actually cold here. Lots of children are barefoot. It's dirty everywhere. There's just garbage and open sewage. Gaza is littered with garbage wherever you go, even in between tents, and children sort of walk in the midst of that, often without shoes, as I said. There's been a very dire lack of access to healthcare. The healthcare system has virtually collapsed. So whether you have a pre-existing medical condition or whether you are injured, you will not be getting the healthcare that you need. I've actually met with children who were hospitalized, one child with leukemia, who died a few days later after I met with him. The hospital was not able to give him the treatment that he needed, wasn't even able to alleviate his pain. There's also severe hunger throughout the Gaza Strip. We are particularly worried for North Gaza Governorate, the most northern part of the Gaza Strip, because that part has been under an effective siege since early October. Hardly any supplies have reached that area. But there's severe hunger throughout Gaza, really. You know, families have been living off canned food, flour, whatever meals they were able to get their hands on from food kitchens. There's been children queuing for loaves of bread, fighting with other children, fighting with adults. Back in November, there were two adolescent girls and a woman who were squeezed, trampled to death as they were queuing for bread. So the conditions are absolutely desperate. This is a very, very serious humanitarian crisis. The ceasefire is a critical first step, but on its own, it will not take away the broad spectrum of suffering of families here. It's critical that aid can enter Gaza at scale, but not just aid. We also need the private sector. We need commercial supplies to enter Gaza. We humanitarians, we bring in very specialized supplies. So for instance, when it comes to UNICEF and malnutrition, UNICEF brings in nutritional supplements, therapeutic food for infants, high energy biscuits, plumpy nuts for malnourished children. But their families, what they need in parallel is to be able to buy fresh produce, to access fish, meat, dairy products, vegetables, fruit. So that has to go hand in hand. So this ceasefire is a very critical first step. It'll put an end to the killing and maiming of children, but we also have lots of challenges lying ahead. We need aid to be scaled up to address the immense suffering of children here.
Indeed, you know, so much does need to be done. This has been, as you said, such a harrowing conflict, especially for children. And I saw also on your social media, you shared this really desperate story of this young boy. I think it was a 5-year-old boy called Saad, who lost his eyesight, and he spoke about his eyesight now going to heaven. Is there a sense that children have been robbed of their childhood, but also that they may never get it back due to what they've seen and what they've really endured?
Over these past 15 months, children have absolutely been robbed of their childhood. They've been robbed of the right to be a child, really. Instead, they've been exposed to relentless violence. They've lived through things that no child should live through, that no child should have to witness. But it's not just the direct exposure to violence and the scale of the violence. It's also the unrelenting nature of the violence and the fact that there's nowhere safe to flee to. And children are acutely aware of that. The children I spoke with over the past couple of months, they were terrified. They were absolutely terrified of losing their lives. And that 5-year-old boy that you just referenced, Saad, whom I met last month. He indeed became blind after his home was bombed. He has severe burns over the lower part of his body. He has a skull fracture that has now led to him losing his eyesight. And he spoke about the people who died in that airstrike. He said he wasn't killed, but his eyes were killed. And indeed, his eyes went to heaven before he did. So every single child in Gaza today, even those that haven't been injured, every single child is deeply, deeply scarred by the traumatic experiences that they've witnessed. And every single child is in dire need of psychosocial support. When we speak about support to families in Gaza, that's not just support that we will bring in on aid trucks. Some support is actually not material. It's this psychosocial, mental health help for children, but it's also things like restarting education. The suffering of children, the very toxic stress that they have had to live with for over 15 months has been compounded by the fact that there's been no reprieve for them over the course of the war. They haven't been able to go to school for 1 year and a half. That's 1 year and a half of learning loss, but that's also 1 year and a half of normalcy that they've been robbed of. Going to school is not just about education. It's also about daily routine. It's about socialization. It helps children in their social development. It's a place where children can play, where they can be a child again. So children in Gaza have been stuck in this cycle of exposure to violence and very toxic stress. And it's therefore critical that this ceasefire, which has started today, that it lasts, so that these children are given some reprieve and a chance to recover.
So, beyond going back to school and starting something that, all of us all over the world take for granted, our education, what other levers are there to provide that security that children especially need in the Gaza Strip?
In terms of security, I think we should also think of the physical security that a shelter, a warm shelter, can bring to families, which is currently lacking here in Gaza. So the vast majority of families have been displaced, mostly here to the southern and central part of Gaza. The moment I get out of the UNICEF compound here, I see makeshift tents, improvised tents, as far as the eye stretches. They've been made of plastic canvas, of blankets, whatever people could get their hands on. They're absolutely inadequate. They don't protect against the cold. They don't protect against the rain. I was in one tent where a girl told me that she wasn't able to sleep at night because of the stray dogs right outside of the tent. She said she could hear them roaming around, and she was terrified of these dogs and that they could just enter the tent. The tent didn't protect them. There's other families who've taken refuge in school buildings, hoping that classrooms would provide some safety and security. The schools that have been turned into shelters that I visited were suffering equally squalid conditions, very unsanitary conditions. I went to one school where 8,000 people lived in Deir al-Balah, where there were about 20 to 25 people in every classroom, really overcrowded conditions. And chickenpox had just broken out there and was spreading in that specific shelter. The ability of people to return to their homes, to reconstruct their homes, will be important in offering security mentally, psychologically, but also physically. It's right now, it is winter in Gaza, and it actually does get cold here, especially at night. We've already experienced several important storms, very rough winds, lots of rainfall, with some tents even being washed away into the sea. Lots of water in the tents, lots of mud everywhere. And yeah, as I said, children aren't equipped. They don't have winter clothes. Lots of them are barefoot. So these are very difficult conditions for children to be in.
They are indeed. And Rosalia Bolin, spokesperson for UNICEF, we thank you for also giving such a full account of those small moments that may seem insignificant but can impact a human suffering even more, and for people to hear those harsh realities so that, this ceasefire does hold. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.